This video's purpose is to highlight a few sound design pitfalls I see people frequently run into when they are just getting started learning sound design. The topics I want to cover are high noise floor recordings, misuse of stereo recordings instead of mono, critical content bands, noisy content selection, low frequency width, wide image reverbs, and cleaning tops and tails. In this first example, I've recorded some footsteps in an environment that has a high noise floor. What this means is that the unwanted noise is very loud compared to the sound we want to record, the footsteps. Let's take a listen. When these footsteps are cut up to be individual assets, which now may be spot to a picture or tagged in an animation timeline, we will hear that the ambient noise floor cuts in and out. There are many methods to clean up source recordings, but a good best practice is to find a quiet environment relative to how loud or soft the source you are recording is. If I am recording a rocket ship taking off, most ambient noise floor will not matter because the source is so much louder than the noise floor itself. However, something soft like footsteps will require a softer noise floor so we can later manipulate the file without emphasizing the unwanted parts of the recording. Here's a recording I did in a quieter environment. With a recording like this, I would be free to cut these individual footsteps up and trigger clean footstep recordings on an animation timeline without the fear of a noise floor cutting in and out and pumping in the mix. Another problem with this recording is that it is a stereo file. Something like footsteps or Foley recordings should be mono most of the time. The easiest way to achieve a mono recording from a stereo recording is to drop one of the channels. This helps you avoid any phasing or other unwanted artifacts. Let's take a listen to the difference between the mono and stereo footstep recordings. These are not good recordings, but we should hear that between the mono and the stereo does contain unwanted information, unnecessary width that the mono recording really focuses to the center. And for an extra tip, this recording is missing a slate. A slate is when you use your voice to give details about the recording you are making. A slate can happen ideally at the beginning of a recording or at the end if there wasn't time at the start. These can be as detailed as you want to make them, but at a minimum should describe what you are recording, what mic or mics you are using, and their associated channels on the recorder. In this example from Red Dead Redemption 2, we can hear that the core identity of the gun sound lives between 100 Hz and 12,000 Hz. If I bypass this EQ, the low and high frequencies add more thump and air, giving the sound life and excitement. But when I take away those elements, the sound still reads very clearly to me. It's important to think about this when layering and designing sounds. Sometimes we can be wowed by an overly bassy sound or something very bright and brash. But these frequencies often don't translate well to smaller consumer playback systems, and so choosing content that can flesh out the heart of the sound at 300 Hz to give it a chestiness or 1000 Hz to give it intelligibility ensures that our sounds are powerful and read across a wide variety of listening environments. To put it simply, if we rely on extremities of the frequency spectrum, our sound can feel hollow and at worst be perceived as inaudible or missing on a poor playback system. When we're browsing through sound effects libraries or designing a sound with multiple layers, we should be mindful of how much broadband noise the resulting sound contains. Broadband noise can end up sounding like a white noise machine, which in a game mix will end up masking or covering up other sounds. This is best avoided by choosing source that is less noisy or static in its activity and doing some post-processing to clean up any unwanted noise in the sounds you are designing with. I've got two different rain recordings here. Let's take a listen. To me, the first one sounds very broadband, noisy, and static. In a game mix, that's going to cover up other things. We're going to have to duck it, and we're going to hear it duck and pump. That's not great. The second rain recording sounds like it has a pattering and a sizzling, almost like bacon frying. That's a much more useful asset, and I would probably EQ it a little further to try and bring out some of the character of the sound and reduce the static noise elements like the background wash. Here's another example of a river recording I did. This is not my favorite recording of a river, but I want to show how a little processing can help bring out the character of this sound and reduce some noise. So here's an EQ I used. And I'm even using a multiband compressor and an upward expander mode to try and enhance the dynamics of this just a little bit to pull down that static element. Again, this is not my favorite recording of a river, but I'm trying to show you how with a little cleanup, you can take maybe an average recording and just elevate the character of it a little bit and clean out a lot of junk that's just going to clog up your final mix of your game or your video. Sound files can contain low frequency with stereo information or a wide bass sound. Most of the time, it's hard for the listeners to perceive any of this width in the low frequencies or even for consumer monitoring setups to reproduce this with any clarity. A good practice is to mono out the bass frequencies, usually below 100 Hz, for a tighter and more powerful sound. Let's take a listen to an example. So I have a mono sound here that I have added a ping pong delay to make the sound extra wide, and I've used a couple R basses to exaggerate the bass. To state the obvious, there's too much bass in this recording, but we're going to use it for some listening. I'm going to use this multiband imaging tool called Stage 1, but Isotope also makes one. There's a handful of these out there. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the frequencies in the low band here, and I'm going to narrow them, right? Let's take a listen. So you can hear how when I take this up to 500 Hertz or even 300 Hertz, it's very dramatic. It's too much. I probably wouldn't want to narrow it to mono that high, but especially on headphones, and again, this recording has too much bass as I designed it to be, setting this around 100 Hertz and bringing it to mono really focuses the sound, where without it, it's very wide and kind of muddy. If you don't have an imaging tool, another way you could try to do this is with an EQ that provides you with a mid-side option. So in ProQ, I can add a high-pass filter. Let's just bring it up to 200 to be dramatic. And here it's set to stereo by default, but they also have a mid-side mode. So mid would be the center of the image or the correlated shared parts of the sound. And the side would be the wide parts of the signal, the parts that are different, the left and right, the uncorrelated part of the signal. And this would effectively remove that width from the bass. And last but not least, I want to talk about reverb width. This is not so much a pitfall as just a creative choice, and it took me years to start to get my ears wrapped around this concept, but I think it makes a big difference in terms of conveying depth and spatial positioning to the listener, especially in a linear format. So I've got some footsteps of someone running, and I'm sending that to a reverb. Also, pro tip, I EQ before all my reverbs. I'm usually taking bass out of things. But yeah, just the default Altiverb setting at 100% wet on my send. Let's take a listen. So we've got our dry sound and our wet sound, and you can hear when you put a reverb on, it's full stereo width. A lot of times these reverbs are very wide. So now what I want to do on my panner here is start narrowing the width, and I want us to take a listen to how this, to me, starts to define the sound in the space. So I could very easily imagine a scene of someone running down a school hallway or something, and to me, when the width is not at 100%, when I've narrowed it down, it really gives it definition to what's in front of me. When it comes to mixing, this will also give you the added benefit of making more room in the stereo field for something like music, which is, I won't say always, but it's usually going to be very wide. And I've got this send on a pre-fader send, so if I wanted to, I could even start to turn down the dry source. We could play with that a little bit. So I'm going to play with the volume of both reverb and dry signal. So in my imagination there, I guess we started close to the person running, turn the reverb down. The reverb was a little wider, and then I started to pull the dry signal down and narrow the reverb out to 0. And to me, it just sounds like that person is getting further away from me. And if you go out into the real world, I encourage you to do this. You'll look crazy, but it's something I do a lot. Just go out and clap or make or tss, 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 those kind of sounds, and just listen to what the space does. Reverb and even slapback delays can be very, very directional, very narrow. And I think that is a great ear training exercise to get your ears going on. So in game sound design, when we go to render sounds, we often have variations of small little files. So here we've got some footsteps again. And we can see a couple things here. One of them starts right at the beginning of the waveform. One of them has silence before the waveform, and one of them has silence before and after the waveform. Basically, a good rule of thumb here is that when you're cutting sounds, you really want to leave no silence or dead air in the file. So things like this and things like this, we should get rid of those. It's critical to cut your sounds right at the start, because that means when an event plays in a game engine, like on a footstep, the sound plays immediately. If there's silence at the front of the waveform, your sound will be delayed in starting because it will start from the beginning of this file, which has silence. As far as cleaning the end of the file, it's important to delete silence because this becomes an optimization issue, becomes a memory issue. If your files are bigger and there's no content there that the listener's hearing, you're basically giving away memory. The way I achieve this, if I take these recordings and just sort of mess them up a little bit, is to use a feature called strip silence. And I can tidy these up really quickly by using auto trim / split item, my mistake. I've dialed in these settings to where I like them. There you go. They start right on the start of the waveform, and it gives me a fade. Now I can render these files. They start right at the beginning. There's no dead air at the end. Totally optimized, good to go. So I hope this is helpful. These are some really fundamental lessons that have helped me in my own sound design. These are things I practice on a daily basis and things that I had to be mentored on or discover on my own. So I hope this is helpful for people trying to get started on their sound design journey. Thanks for watching.